There's been something that's kind of been on my mind a lot lately, and when something's on your mind a lot, sometimes you have to try and figure out, where it fits. And one of the things that I've been kind of thinking a lot about, one, it seems like for the last year or so, we've spent a whole lot of time in the New Testament. And of course, that's a good thing. There's a lot of wonderful things in the New Testament. But I also kind of believe that too often we forget about the Old Testament. And there's so many amazing things in the Old Testament. And I think it's so important to kind of realize that from the beginning of the Bible, everything points to Jesus. I think the other thing that was kind of on my mind was, I've really enjoyed doing the Bible reading plan. I encourage everybody to do that. If it's something you haven't been doing, pray about it and maybe start in January. And one of the things I was thinking about was how much I love the book of Genesis. And I think it's one of those books that, you kind of sit there and you think about, okay, it's the first book, and it's a book about creation, and that's pretty much the big story is creation. And so we don't really go back to that book a lot. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to go back to Genesis. And at first I thought, okay, maybe that's something that will start in January. And then when I thought about it, I was kind of like, based on the reading plan and everything, we'll be 2 Sundays in, and all of a sudden it'll be onto the book of Exodus. So we won't really be able to look at it that much as we go through the reading. And so I kind of thought it's important to maybe go through it before we get there. Because what we're going to find out is that in the book of Genesis, it's not only the story of creation, but it's kind of the story about Noah and the story about Joseph, and there's so many other stories there. And a lot of times when we go over these stories, we kind of have one of those, okay, who was the son of who, or who's the father of who, or who's the wife of this person, and you kind of get a little lost and confused. And so I thought, let's go ahead and start it now. We'll take a few breaks along the way, but hopefully by the time January comes, we'll have kind of gone through it, and it'll make the reading plan a lot smoother. And Genesis is one of those books that if you don't have to think too hard and you can just kind of sit back and enjoy it, it's a wonderful, beautiful book with a lot of just great stories. And so that's kind of where we are today. And I just kind of started off with the words "in the beginning." And those are, of course, the first words in the Bible, in the beginning. And like I said, I think it's so important to realize where it starts. It all starts with these words, in the beginning. And for those of us that maybe grew up in the church, who have been going to church for a long time, we knew this, in the beginning. And we know that the Bible starts with the story of creation. But what I've also found out is that for people who didn't grow up in the church, again, so many churches, they start, in the New Testament. And so for a lot of people who maybe didn't grow up in the church, they've never even went over the book of Genesis. And so here we are at the beginning. And so if we just start off here and we go to the next slide, Genesis 1 through 31, which will cover the whole first chapter. And it says the account of creation. And as I was kind of reading these things, I thought to myself, it's so difficult. I was tempted to add chapter 2 in here and go over a whole bunch. And then I thought to myself, I'm going to be in the same situation I'm always in. I'm either going to add too much and I'm going to have to rush through it, or I'm just going to have to figure out what is God trying to tell us here. It's so easy just to read through these things so quickly. And so I tried to break it down by day here, but it starts off the account of creation. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And so again, as we read this, so many other people who, they're going to tell you, hey, there was a big bang and all of a sudden the world was here. Or they're going to say, I don't know. I feel like it's, the whole chicken and the egg and who came first. And so here we are, and it's so important to realize before we go any further into the Bible, before there was anything, God was there. And he is the creator. And so go ahead and go to the next slide here. And so it says in verse 3, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day." And again, as I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, the first thing that he said was, "Let there be light." And again, as we kind of look at the New Testament, where we spend so much time, what does God tell us to be? He tells us to be a light to the world. That there's a whole lot of darkness. And what he says to us is we need to be the light. And so again, something that I've never thought about, something that, you just kind of take for granted. Yeah, there was light. That's what God did. But again, from the beginning of time, he was kind of establishing what he wanted. Go ahead. And so it says here in verse 6, "Then God said, 'Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth.' And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. God called the space sky, and evening passed and morning came, marking the second day." And so again, as we're kind of going through these things, I think I was kind of guilty of not really realizing how many times he's talking about the waters of the heavens and the waters of the earth. I've never thought about that. We just think that, as a child, you're kind of taught, here's the earth and then there's the sky, and somehow on the other side of the sky is heaven. And so here we are, and he's talking about the waters of the earth and separating, the earth from the heaven. And again, something I guess I never really spent that much time thinking about. You just think to yourself, here's this sky here, and at some point it ends and heaven starts. And if we continue here we have the second day, and we're going on to the third day. And it says, "Then God said, 'Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear.' And that is what happened. God called the dry ground land, and the waters seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, 'Let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kind of plants and trees from which they came.' And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants, and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the third day." And as I kind of read this, there was a couple things that I kind of thought about. There towards the bottom it says, and God saw that it was good. And that's something that we're going to kind of come back to. But after every single day, God says, He looks at what he created, he said, and it was good. But the other thing that I was thinking about, and of course, when you know how the story ends, you kind of look at things differently. But God had a plan here. And as we kind of keep reading here, what we find out is, why would it matter that all these things that he created, we're going to create more? It talks in there and it says, "These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees for which they came from." Which means that obviously something was going to happen to the original, and he was going to need more. And as I was kind of sitting there looking at those things, I was thinking to myself, from the beginning, he knew that he was going to create man. And he knew that man was going to need to be taken care of. So it wasn't this random thing where, God decided, okay, I'm going to make man. And then he kind of saw what was going to happen. And then he said, oh, I need to see what man needs, and then I'll create that. This whole entire time, he was creating an environment so that when he created what he was ultimately going to create, it was taken care of. And again, I think there's a lesson here on sometimes, we question, hey, we want to go one way, and God says, no, I'm not going to do that. You need to stop, or, we can't figure out God's timing. and we want to argue with God about his time. And I think as we read the story of creation, it's just another example of God knowing what he's doing with his own time. He knew that it didn't make any sense to create a human and not have anywhere for him to be. You know, if it was up to us, we'd create a million humans and they'd all be floating all around, not knowing where to go. Instead, God said, you know what, I'm gonna make land. And I'm gonna make vegetation. And I'm gonna make sure that they have everything that they need. And so again, as I was reading this, it was just one of those things where I was thinking to myself, how many times do I question God? How many times do I question whether God's going to provide for me? How many times do I think, hey, maybe I should go in this order, not that order? And there's just something crazy about, God having to say, that's not what I said. And so again, here it is in the beginning, and we're not even, 15 verses in. And we're already seeing that God has a plan for us. And God knows what's best for us. And so if we continue, then God said, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on earth. And that is what happened. God made two great lights, the larger one to govern the day, and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the fourth day. And so again, I think one of the things that, maybe it's a little bit different here in Riverton, but, growing up in Council Bluffs or living in Omaha, you just don't take advantage of looking up at the sky that much. And it's one of those things, again, as we talk about things that we can do this week to maybe become closer to God, just look up in the sky. It's amazing. I don't know if it's a sign that I'm getting older or what, but Shelley and I sure seem to be playing that game a lot more of, hey, look at the clouds and what do you see? We seem to be playing that game a lot. And there's been times that, you're outside at night and you look up at the sky and you see the stars. It's a lost art just to sit there and look at it. And it's one of the quickest, easiest ways to see God's beauty. Just look up in the sky. And here we are, and he's talking about creation, and, here's the fourth day. And in the fourth day of God's existence, he made the stars. And here we are, all these years later, still looking up at this beauty that God made on the fourth day. And again, to sit there and realize that, he made the light and he made something to take care of us at night. He knew what we needed. And obviously it's not going to come for a few more days here, but he knew how important rest was. And so he created these things knowing, hey, guess what? These guys are going to need a certain amount of light, but guess what? They also need some darkness so they can rest. And so again, it's just another example of him knowing what we needed before we were even created. And again, as he finishes this fourth day, he looks at everything and he calls it good. And so here in verse 20 it says, then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind. So God created great sea creatures and everything living that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and the birds multiply on the earth. And evening passed and morning came, marking the fifth day. And so again, here we are. We're looking at what God did. And it says here that he wanted the fish to fill the seas. And again, if we were watching him, would we be sitting there going, why would you do that? Why do we need so many fish? Why do we need so many different kinds of fish? And not only why do we need so many, but now they're multiplying. And why do we need birds? That's what we would be doing. We would be questioning God. Hey, you made a whole bunch of different birds. Is that really what you wanted to do? And again, as I get older, I find myself looking at birds more often. For you younger ones, get ready. It's going to happen to you. Buy some binoculars now. You're going to need them at some point. And you just sit back, and he just had a plan. And everything points to the same thing. And right now, as we go through this first chapter, he's creating something for us. And he's creating something that's going to last thousands and thousands of years. But he knew what he needed. And he knew what he was doing. And it's just so amazing to sit there and think about how he was doing all these things. And sometimes we just take them for granted. We sit there and we think, oh, I have this issue coming up and I don't want to go to God with it. It's too small, it's too big, it's too crazy. Oh, I'm too much of a sinner. But if we sit back and we look, here we are on the 5th day. And he was creating everything for us. And so here in verse 24 it says, Then God said, Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that is what happened. And so again, when we talked a month or so ago about God being the creator. And here he is just creating all these different animals. And it says, and that is what happened. Whatever God wanted to happen, happened. He knew that we needed a bunch of different animals, and so he said, let's make animals, and that's what happened. And to sit there and think about how, it says that each producing offspring of the same kind. And again, I think these are things that people want to argue about. They want to say, no, I think this is how it happened. No, it happened because that's what God said was going to happen, and that's what happened. And so if we continue here, in verse 26, I think I skipped some. 25, sorry. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So again, here he is. He's just explaining everything to us. And again, for a lot of us, this is something that we've read a million times. We used to sing a song about creation. And it would go, day one, and this is what he did. And so I know this is something that it seems like we've been over a million times. But it's also something that we forget. It's also something that we take for granted. And so here's God, and he's getting ready to create humans. And so it says here, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And I think it's so important just to stop right there. And it says he created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. And I don't even know how to talk about that or explain that. But we were made in the image of God. And there's so many things in this world that pull us away from that. There's so many things in this world that try and tell us, no, that's not who you are. But I think it's so important to remember that that's who we were made after. We were made after God's image. Somebody who loved us and cared about us and created a whole entire world just for us to live in. He loved us and he cared for us and he provided for us. And he did all those things. And then he said, I'm going to create man and woman, and I'm going to create them in my own image. And when I read that, I just think to myself, if we're created in his image, then in order for us to fulfill what we're supposed to do, we need to try and be like him. We need to try and provide for other people. We need to be thinking of other people and what we can do for them. And it also means that we need to stop questioning everything. It's so hard to sit back and not question God's timing sometimes. We talk about things that have happened, some of the negative things that have happened with us. I don't know why car accidents happen. I don't know why people pass away long before they should. And we spend so much time questioning God in those situations and getting mad. And I want to be clear, I think it's okay to get mad. But I think if you're going to get mad, you need to go to God and say, what am I supposed to take from this? What am I supposed to learn from this? You made me in your own image. So I know that you're providing something for me. You want me to learn something from this. Maybe you're taking me from a horrible path that I was going to go on. But what am I supposed to do with this information? What am I supposed to do with this tough situation? Right now I'm hurting. Right now I'm sad. Right now I'm mad. What am I supposed to be taking from this? And it says, then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. Then God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth, and all the fruit trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. Everything that has life. And that is what happened. Then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. And as we look at that sixth day, everything else he said was good. But he looked at man and he said, that's very good. He knew that something was different about that creation. Something was special. And if we go to this last slide, a little bit into Genesis 2. And it says, so the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. And on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. So he rested from all of his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all of his work of creation. And so again, if we kind of look forward a little bit, he talks about the Sabbath and keeping it holy and making sure that we get our rest. And so again, here's God, day 7 of the world, being an example to us. And again, I know that this was kind of an introduction to Genesis. I know that a lot of us already know these things. But I also think it's important to go back sometimes and read this. From the beginning, God had a plan. From the beginning, God knew what we needed. From the beginning, he loved us. And he noticed that we were special, and he wanted to take care of us. So again, as we go throughout our week, how can we show the world that we're made in God's image? And maybe this week all we need to do is just think about that ourselves. Sometimes we all have those days where we feel frustrated. We feel, like, why am I here? Because God has you and he made you in his own image. God wanted you here. It says so many times in those verses, and it happened. God created you because he needed you and he wanted you. And let's remember that as we go throughout our week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you so much for creating us in your image. And please help us to just look at this story and realize how much you love and care for us. And just how intentional it was that you made each and every single one of us. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.